Members of the Central American migrant caravan have taken to sleeping on the streets in Mexico after heavy rains and flooding forced a mass exodus of an overcrowded shelter near the U.S. border. Women and children were among those pictured with their soaking, wet belongings on the street in Tijuana on Saturday as they waited for buses to arrive to take them to a new shelter. Many were spotted resting in their tents on the street after the initial shelter, which was set up in a sports complex, had services cut off on Friday. Torrential rains during the week reduced the old shelter to a muddy, smelly mess. Authorities were trying to persuade the migrants to move to a new, more distant shelter in a former outdoor Tijuana concert venue. But Saturday afternoon, most of the thousands of migrants who had camped out at the sports complex had agreed to move to the new location. Others, however, decided to try their luck camping in a street near the former shelter or look for their own accommodation. Still, as many as half the 6,000 or so migrants who'd have been staying at the sports complex were milling around at mid-afternoon, apparently unwilling to relocate to the new shelter much farther from the border. Alejandro Magallanes, an assistant to the director of the city's social services department, said officials hope to bus as many migrants as possible Friday. Magallanes said nobody would be forced to move to the new facility, a large building and concrete patio known as Barretal, that has been used for concerts and other events up until about 6 years ago. But city officials plan to stop offering food and medical services at the Benito Juarez sports complex next to the border on Friday, and any migrants who stay will have to find their own food. Carlos Padilla, a 57-year-old who sold jewelry as a street vendor in Honduras, waited outside the flooded sports complex as it was being cleared out by authorities. He was with a 12-year-old boy who he took under his wing after the boy's parents left the caravan to return to Honduras. Sitting on a curb with soaking wet shoes and socks that he keeps on at night for fear they will be stolen, Padilla said he slept on canopy-covered pavement at the sports complex, but wind blew water through exposed sides. Bathrooms were flooded, and there was no toilet paper. It was terrible, said Padilla, who hopes to claim asylum with the boy in the U.S. and join a brother in Los Angeles. It was like sleeping on the beach. Jose Castro, a 45-year-old banana picker from Honduras, said he had slept with his wife and their 2 daughters, ages 4 and 5, under wet cotton sheets on an open field inside the shelter. He plans to seek asylum in the US.Asked to describe conditions at the sports complex. He could only croak mud, water, wind, having nearly lost his voice with a bad cough. Experts had expressed concerns about unsanitary conditions at the sports complex, where more than 6,000 migrants have been packed into a space adequate for half that many people. Mud, lice infestations and respiratory infections were rampant. Magallanes said many migrants squeezed into a gymnasium at the outdoor sports complex amid a steady downpour Thursday night. The complex was covered with mud from the storm. On Friday, rain was intermittent with breaks in the clouds. Some migrants had found work near the sports complex and were unsure about moving to a place they did not know, though it meant they would have a roof over their heads. Authorities and residents in Tijuana are concerned the migrants might try to make another mass rush across the border. Their first attempt last weekend led to a brief closure of border crossings that Tijuana residents use to reach jobs and shopping on the U.S. side.The new shelter is a former outdoor concert venue with walls and buildings on all four sides to create a single entry and exit. Federal authorities leased the compound from a private owner. Mario Figueroa, Tijuana's social development director, said the shelter could accommodate more than 10,000 people, most of them on the outdoor concrete courtyard, where audiences listened to bands before the venue closed. About 1,500 migrants had arrived by mid-afternoon, and everyone at the old shelter was expected to be transferred by the end of the day, Figueroa said. Families and children are priorities for covered areas, Figueroa said. A room that was once used for parties can accommodate about 500 families, he said. The floors are all concrete, which will prevent the ground turning to mud as it did in the previous shelter. Franklin Sosa, a 20-year-old bus dispatcher from Honduras who hopes to seek asylum in the U.S., said the previous shelter was a disaster. The conditions are better, he said near a line of men waiting for a haircut at the new shelter. There's no mud. Meanwhile, several migrants swam around or climbed over the border barrier overnight and were detained by U.S. officials. 6 men and one woman jumped or slipped over the border barrier in Tijuana and were quickly detained by Customs and Border Protection agents. One Honduran man tried to swim to the U.S. side but quickly got in trouble in the rough waters of the Pacific. A Mexican rescue team forcibly pulled him ashore and put him into an ambulance,